Hello YouTube, Mr. Mags here. In my last video, I analyzed every single Pokemon in-game trade to determine the ones that I believed were good and the ones that are not as good. I had a lot of fun making that video, but it was all essentially for the purposes of research for the video I'll be presenting today, where I'll be going over what I believe are the top 10 best and top 10 worst in-game trade Pokemon. And if you want any more context or look at any of the other trades that I don't talk about today, I highly recommend watching that video first or at some point. But today I'll just be going over what I believe are the 10 best and worst trades throughout the entire Pokemon franchise. And just like last time, their criteria are very similar, just tweaked slightly. I'll be analyzing these trades based on the availability of the Pokemon that you trade compared to the availability of the Pokemon you receive. If the Pokemon that you trade is super common, doesn't take a lot of resources to get, and then you trade for a Pokemon that you only find a super later is incredibly powerful, would take a lot of resources to get, or a Pokemon that you just generally wouldn't be able to find in the region regardless outside of this, that is a good trade. However, if it's a Pokemon that you can only find super late for something that's way more common. You're trading a Pokemon that you have to level up super high or use a certain item or resource on in order to evolve it for a Pokemon that is not at least equivalent in its rarity. That would be considered a bad trade. The usefulness of the Pokemon received. A lot of in-game trade Pokemon, especially in the earlier regions, were specifically done to give the player an option for upcoming gyms and other trials and stuff. So those are obviously very good. But if a Pokemon just seems like the trade is just kind of random, it doesn't really seem to help the player in any meaningful way, that would be more so on the bad side. I'll also be analyzing when the trade is possible to complete. Um, for the purposes of these top 10 lists, I'll be prioritizing earlier trades on the good, on the top 10 best side, and later game trades on the bad side. A trade can be absolutely terrible, but if it happens super early on, it doesn't really impact the player as much. But if it's one of the last trades you can do around like the seventh or eighth gym, and it's for a garbage Pokemon that you wouldn't even use earlier. That is a bad trade. However, on the flip side, like I said previously, if a Pokemon is caught super early and helps you through, you know, specifically helps you through several other gyms, especially early on, that is considered good. However, even if a Pokemon is useful into some of the later gyms, because it happens so late, it can't really help the player as much throughout, most of their playthrough. So this still might be on the list as a good trade, but it'll be skewed a little. It won't be viewed as good as ones that help the player earlier on. And lastly, I'll only be talking about main story trades, so only trades that happen before you beat the Elite Four. So these are only trades that can help you throughout your main journey. This won't take into account any post-game trades, even the trades from Kanto and any of the Johto games. Those will not be counted, only ones before the first time you can beat the Elite Four. All right, so let's jump right into it to my top 10 worst list. I decided to start with my worst list. This was actually originally going to be a top five of both, um, but I eventually did find 10 of each to in order to make a top 10 of each. But honestly, I was kind of surprised with this. The top 10 worst list was actually a little harder to create. Um, I only found maybe 11 or so that could even be considered 10. Five was very easy. It was very easy to find five that I thought were absolutely terrible. And then I kind of had to broaden my scope a little more in order to in order to nail down 10 that I really thought were bad, but I really do feel like these are the absolute 10 worst trades. The top 10 best, that actually came a lot easier. The reason why this is I start with the worst is just I needed to have a little more time in order to develop the top 10 best, but this is definitely what I believe to be the top 10 worst trades in all of Pokemon. Starting out at number 10, we have the Pikachu for the Skitty in Ruby and Sapphire Fortree City. Now, this is not a good trade. I do not recommend doing this trade for any single person. Skitty is an absolutely terrible Pokemon, especially in Gen 3. Delcatty is barely worth using the Moonstone. I would recommend using it on Jigglypuff if you were to use it at all. Uh, so I would not recommend getting a Skitty, especially this late in the game, right before the sixth gem. That's not worth it, in my opinion. Especially considering you're trading a potential answer into Winona, being Pikachu. I just don't see a reason to ever do this trade. The only reason it is this high, low, however you decided to scale worst lists. The reason it's at number 10 is because Skitty is a very rare Pokemon in the route that you find it in. You can find it in a route right above Rustboro City. So you've had access to Skitty for a while now if you wanted to use one, but it is, I believe, at a 1% encounter rate on that route. So there's a very high chance that you just completely missed it and don't feel like going all the way back just, to complete a Pokedex entry. So you know, if you come here, have already been to the Safari Zone, or you want to go to the Safari Zone and come back, Pikachu is fairly common in the Safari Zone. So for that reason, I'm not going to put it any, I'll say, lower on this list just because for the purposes of completing your Pokedex, this might not be the worst option. However, if you don't really care about completing your Pokedex and you're just doing a regular playthrough, would never recommend anybody do this trade. Number 9, we have Nidorino for Nidorina on Route 11 of Red and Blue. This is a super weird trade for a couple of reasons. One, you're essentially trading for an equivalent Pokemon. I know they have slightly different stats, but they're both poison types that both evolve into poison ground types. They both have very similar move sets. I don't see a reason to do that trade, especially since they're not like the version exclusive or anything. You can just get a Nidoran female before this point, regardless. What's even weirder about this is that an earlier trade was a Nidoran male for a Nidoran female. So if you were doing an all trade run of red and blue slash Leafing Fire Red, you would potentially end that game with two Nidoqueens. So one I think is kind of quirky, have Nidoran for Nidoran, but Nidorino for Nidorina, not. I don't think that's a good trade. Now, one could argue that this trade is here on Route 11, right next to the Electric Gym, in order to give the player a Pokemon that can evolve into a ground type to help out in the Electric Gym. But two problems with that. One, um, no one in the Nidoran line can learn Dig in Generation 1. I don't know why. Or at least I know that Nidorina cannot. I'm pretty sure that Nidorino can't either, but I know for a fact Nidorina slash Nidoqueen cannot learn Dig in Gen 1. So yes, still be good defensively against Lieutenant Surge, but you wouldn't be able to hit back with any super effective moves. Two, that's not good logic because Nidorino can also evolve into a ground type. So and arguably an even better ground type, considering that Nidoking is the primary Pokemon that people use during speed runs. So I don't know why this trait exists in the way that it does. Couldn't tell you. So yeah, an easy number 9 spot on the worst list. Number 8, we have a Bunnelby for a Squovit at Motostoke City in Sword and Shield. This one almost feels like a mistake. Like I know that it's not, but unless I'm missing something, this feels so random and pointless because you can find Skwovet on Route 1 of the Galar region, but you find Bunnelby on Route 2 of the Galar region. In fact, you find Skwovet also on Route 2. So I really don't know why any player would trade a Bunnelby or Skwovet. Yeah, Bunnelby are pretty common, but Skwovet are even more common. If this Skwovet had some kind of egg move or a really good nature, which it doesn't, has mild, I think, which raises its special attack, you're never going to use special attacks with this thing. Or if it had its hidden ability, like I really don't know why anyone would even consider doing this trade or why it's here at all. Like, I don't know. So because of that is very easily on this list at number 8. Number 7, we have the Raichu for an Electrode in Cinnabar Island in Red and Blue. This was the thing I was talking about where you actually have to waste resources on a Pokemon in order to trade it for a Pokemon that does not have equivalent resource use. Raichu, I know that Thunderstones are available in the Celadon department store, but that's still a resource you either have to find or buy in order to evolve your Pikachu. And then just to trade for arguably a worse Pokemon. Not only have you had access to Voltorb plus Electrode for a while now, you've had them ever since just above Rock Tunnel. So you've had the opportunity to have an Electrode for most of the game. But also in Generation 1, with the way stats worked in those games, um, Raichu is plenty fast. 100 speed, that is more than enough. Maybe only at 95 back then, but essentially the way since badge boosts and other just the way those games work, essentially any Pokemon that has higher than 70 speed with the badge boosts and normal leveling, as long as you're around the same level as the opponents, you're probably going to be outspeeding almost everything that you're going to be going up against. With the one exception being possibly Lance's Aerodactyl, but even then, I'm pretty sure Raichu with the badge boost, and also equal on agility. So I think you would be fine. So you don't need Electrode's 140 base speed in order to outspeed unless your only goal is to just send it out and explode. But if your goal is to actually use Thunderbolt, Voltor or Electro actually has lower special attack than Raichu, being 80 compared to Raichu's 90. So there's literally zero reason to do this trade, especially this late in the game when the gym after the one you're at now is a ground gym. There's zero reason why you should ever do this trade. Next up, number 6. Sticking on the same island, on the Japanese blue Cinnabar Island, you can trade a seal for a Slowpoke. Now, Slowpoke slash Slowbro is a very solid Pokemon, especially in Gen 1. It had incredibly high defense and special stats. So it is very bulky. However, you've had access to Slowpoke for a while now, ever since you've had access to fishing rods. Whereas Seal is only accessible in the Seafoam Islands, a completely optional area that Slowpoke is also found in. So why would you ever go to this optional area and then come back to Cinnabar to trade for a Pokemon that you could have found in that optional area? Especially since ice types in Gen 1 are incredibly rare. Um, I feel like Dugong is a much better Pokemon to take through the rest of the game as opposed to or even both. Like Psychic is also an incredibly strong typing, so Dugong and Slowbro together could take on most threats throughout the majority of the rest of the game. So I don't know why you would trade your Seal for a Slowpoke when there's so many other places to get Slowpoke. So yeah, I think a bad trade. It is technically, and this is exactly the same thing I was talking about with the Nidorino and to Nidorina trade. Theoretically, you could argue that Slowpoke is good into the immediate next two gyms, being fire and ground, with it being water type. But Seal is also water type, so that's not a good argument. Moving on to the top five. One more on Cinnabar Island. I like that each of the different Gen 1 games had a Cinnabar Island trade that I thought was generally not very good. We have Kangaskhan, a Pokemon that is found super rare in the Safari Zone only, for a Muck, a Pokemon that is super common in the Pokemon Mansion, which is found on Cinnabar Island. Not that Muck is a terrible Pokemon. It has pretty good attack, and Engine 1 has really good special. So I think I know it has good special defense now. I imagine it kept that special stat back in Gen 1, but regardless, it has really good attacking stats. But Kangaskhan is just an overall very solid Pokemon. It's very well rounded. Um, all the stats you're going to use it for. It has at least very usable stats, an incredible move set, with it being a normal type, you can learn a bunch of different special attacks, but also, body slam and, a lot of just good coverage moves in general. There's literally no reason why you would grind the Safari Zone in order to finally get a Kangaskhan just to trade it for a Muck, which you could go two steps up to the mansion to find one. So yeah, I think this is even more egregious than the seal for Slowpoke trade because at least Slowpoke isn't found on the immediate island that you're in. So whereas, seal is at least fairly common in that optional area, Kangaskhan is extremely rare in the Safari Zone. So again, would never recommend anyone do this trade. Just get a muck from the island you're already on. Number four, we have Gramble for Estini in the Sun and Moon Seafolk Village. This one is another one that's kind of weird for two reasons. One, earlier in the game, there is a trade for a Lillipup for a Bounsweet, pre-evolved form of Steenie. And that trade actually almost made it on this list, but because you could do that trade right before the water trial, technically they're giving you an option for the water trial. So I didn't know that at the time of doing my previous video. I was a little confused about the timeline of the different trials and stuff. But regardless, I still think it's a weird trade because you can find Bounsweet almost immediately after doing that trade. Just go up in the part of Lush Jungle you can go to at that time, and you can find Bounsweet. So it's technically found before you have access to it, but just barely before. So I wouldn't recommend doing that trade. I would recommend just, you know, getting a Bounsweet normally. But regardless, that trade makes this trade even weirder because just like with the Nidorina trade, you can now, if you're doing a trade only run of Sun and Moon, you would end the game with two Serenas. And that's weird to me. I like Serena. It's one of my favorite Pokemon from Gen 7, but I wouldn't necessarily want to go through the game with two of them. That's weird. What makes it even weirder is that on the island that Seafolk Village is a part of, the immediate next trial is the Dragon trial. You're fighting a Komao, which a Gramble with Intimidate would be incredible against. Any fairy type would just absolutely destroy Como, whereas a grass type would struggle immensely against one. You could argue that Steenie is specifically there to give you an answer into the next Kahuna, which is ground, but there are a ton of grass and water type options. You're not hurting for answers into a ground specialist. Whereas, there's not that many fairy type options, not many ground type, or sorry, not many, I don't know, grounds in the mind, not many dragon options for the dragon trial. And yes, you can find Gramble on the island that Seafolk Village is a part of, but it's not worth it going getting Gramble and then coming back just to trade that Gramble for a worse answer into what's coming up. So Yeah, I think that is a really bad trade. Now for number three, we have the Blossom for the Corsola in Pacific Log Town and Ruby and Sapphire. Now, as I said in my previous video, this is one of the two trades that kind of made me spiral down and actually make do this entire process. Because why would you ever use the one Sunstone you have in Sapphire to evolve a Blossom just to trade it for a Corsola, which you could have caught on the routes leading up to Pacific Log? If Corsola was somehow only found like at the top of the waterfall in Evergrande City or underwater, which you theoretically wouldn't have access to yet because you can get to Pacific Log before getting access to dive. But no, it's just a fishing encounter on the routes kind of near Pseutopolis. So why would you ever trade, do put all these resources into a Blossom? It's not a great Pokemon. I don't really recommend even really using the Sunstone unless you're just trying to complete the Pokedex. But you only in Sapphire specifically, you only ever get one Sunstone. Just like with the Skitty trade in Ruby, you only ever get one Moonstone because Solrock and Lunatone are exclusive, and that's how you would grind for more of those stones. In Sapphire, you only ever have the one Sunstone. So if you use it on Blossom and then trade it, and you regret that trade and you want your Blossom back, you can't get one. And the fact that they still have this trade accessible in Ultra or not Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, crazy to me. I I don't know why. Especially, it's not like Corsola is particularly great into any of the upcoming trials or gyms or whatever. I guess you could argue a water type is good into Tate and Liza since they both have rock types, but just like with Steenie, there are so many Pokemon that are good into into rocking psychic types that are found a lot of different places. Like, Sharpedo and Wailmer are found just in the waters off of Moss Deep. So there's zero reason to do this trade. Yeah, I don't get it. But something that I think is even worse than that Pacific Log trade is the other Pacific Log trade in Emerald, that being Bagon for a Horsey. At least with Blossom, there's a pretty good chance that you theoretically could have had a Blossom by the time you get to Pacific Log. Again, I don't recommend doing the trade, but theoretically, you can still take that Corsola into the rest of the game. With this trade, you can't even see Bagon until after you've beaten the eighth gym. You need to scale the waterfall in Meteor Falls in order to get to up to that back area in order to even possibly see Bagon. Whereas you've had access to Horsey for the vast majority of the game up to this point. The earliest you can find Horsey is after you get Surf. If you surf west or east of Slateport, you can go briefly into the Route 134, I believe. You like hit the rapids, then go back, but you're still there on Route 134, and that's a route that you can find Horsey. So as soon as you have a good rod, you can you can find Horsey. And even worse, once you get here in Pacific Log Town, you see this trade for Bagon for Horsey. You can then just keep going west off of Pacific Log Town onto Route 133, 134, and then back to Slateport where you could have gotten him in the first place. So why would anyone ever go through all the trouble to catch a Bagon just to then trade it for a just to trade it for a Pokemon that you've had access to for the majority of the game? Not to mention, the only way to get a dragon scale, which is the way to evolve Seadra into Kingdra, is either off of Wild Bagon or Wild Horsey. So best case scenario, if you were to do this trade, you would need to catch a Bagon that is holding a Dragon Scale at 5%, take it off it, do the trade, and then level it up to a Seadra, then trade with a friend with it holding that Dragon Scale that you had gotten from the Bagon just to finally get a Kingdra. Ridiculous. No, why would anyone ever do this trade? And one honorable mention before we continue. This is one that I said in my overall analysis video that I completely understand why people don't like this trade. I completely get it, but I think it's funny. I think Mindy's trade in Diamond and Pearl, Snow Point City for a Medicham for a Haunter that doesn't evolve is absolutely hilarious. Like the fact that the developers knew that people would, be expecting a Gengar and then just not evolving. Again, I completely understand why people don't like this trade. It's for a lot of people, I can easily see it being number one because it is just that trolly and annoying. But I don't know. I knew it should be on this list somewhere because people don't like it so much, but I don't know, just something about it, just the intentionality of this Haunter that only evolves by trade, holding an Everstone, not evolving. I think that's very funny. So for a lot of people, this is like an honorary number one, but for me, it doesn't really deserve to be on either list because just the intentionality of it, I think makes it just so cool in a way because I actually used Gasper the Haunter in my original playthrough of Diamond. I didn't evolve it until at some point after I beat Elite Four. So my Elite Four, trainer card has this Haunter on it. So Haunter is not a terrible Pokemon. Obviously, it would be better if it did evolve into a Gengar. So finally, number one worst Pokemon in-game trade of all time is in yellow on Route 11. You can trade a Lickitung for a Dugtrio. So ignore the Lickitung for just a second. It doesn't matter what that is. That could be a Rattata. And this would still be in the top three worst worst trades of all time. Because on Route 11, literally at the start of that route, is Diglett's Tunnel, meaning that you could easily just go in there and catch a Diglett or Dugtrio and have a perfectly good answer into Lieutenant Surge. So there is zero reason to ever do this trade, even if this was a Pokemon that was super common. Like, again, just with the Neat Arena, there you could argue, oh, this is so that they give the player a ground type to use against Giovanni or against Lieutenant Surge. I get technically Giovanni later, but like specifically against Lieutenant Surge. But Diglett's Tunnel is right there. You can literally catch Dugtrio in that cave. So already it is not worth it to trade for this Dugtrio that pretty soon after you do that trade probably wouldn't listen to you based on how the listening mechanics for how many badges that you have. So already I wouldn't want to risk that. So let's bring Lickitung back into the fold here. Um, objectively speaking, trading a Lickitung for a Dugtrio, that could possibly actually be a decent trade. Lickitung is not a good Pokemon. It's not like Kangaskhan, where it's actually Kangaskhan is actually a good normal type with a lot of good coverage, really good stats. It just can actually carry you through a lot of the game. Lickitung cannot. It has absolutely terrible stats, really bad move set. I think the best like level up normal type move you can learn is Stomp. So yeah, it's not a good Pokemon in the slightest. So trading this garbage Pokemon for a Dugtrio, I can maybe see someone arguing that's not the worst idea. However, because like I already said, Doug Trio is super common. These Doug Trio line is super common in the cave at the beginning of this route. I wouldn't recommend this trade. But also, Lickitung in yellow isn't found until Cerulean Cave. So that makes this trade infinitely worse than the Bagon trade for number two. At least with the Bagon trade, if you insist on doing that trade, you just have to wait until after you beat the eighth gym. So you can still take that theoretically Kingdra into the Elite Four with you. Again, I wouldn't recommend doing that. Salamence is a way better Pokemon, but you theoretically could do that. Whereas here, you wouldn't even be able to see Lickitung in the wild until you're about to catch a Mewtwo. So there is zero reason why anybody would ever go through all the trials of, in Cerulean Cave, catch that Mewtwo, along the way catching a Lickitung, and then come back to Route 11, remembering they haven't done this trade yet, to get a Doug Trio. So So even the theoretical argument of them giving you a Pokemon that's good in Lieutenant Surge doesn't hold up because you can't do this trade until well after you've already beaten the Elite Four. I would bet an obscene amount of money that not a single person who has ever played Emerald or ever played Yellow has ever done this trade. Because the only way it would ever make sense to do this trade at the point that it's allowing you to do it is if you have a friend who has a Lickitung in their save file of yellow or red and blue, them trading you a Lickitung, so then you can trade that Lickitung for a Doug Trio in your save file of yellow. But if you're doing all that, just have them trade you a better ground type. Ridiculous. So yeah, please let me know if you agree or disagree with any of those choices there. Do you agree with the placement? Do you think Mendy's Haunter should actually be on the actual list somewhere? Um, are there any that are so bad that you think actually deserve to be um, you know, higher on the list, I guess, or do you think I'm a little too harsh on them or whatever? So yeah, please let me know about all that down below because I'm moving on to what I believe are the top 10 best trades in all of Pokemon. And like I said before, this list actually came together a lot easier. There are actually, I think, 12. Once again, I had to whittle down into originally a top five. Then I was like, oh, I have so many, I'll just make it an even top 10. So, yeah, this was actually a very fun list to do. It actually took me a while to really determine the order here. Whereas the other one, I easily knew what the top five were, and even then the rest just kind of came easily. So, starting out with number 10, we have in Black and White 2 on Route 7, you have an Emolga traded for a Gigalith. Now, I would like this trade for two reasons. One, Gigalith is an incredible Pokemon. It can help into the immediate flying gym, and then it's not necessarily going to be super great into many of the other gyms and stuff after because they got rid of the ice gym. Um, but it's still a really good defensive beast that can help you with the Dragon Gym. And also it's just a good Pokemon to use for a lot of the game. But also it's really fun that this is the same Gigalith that you would have traded for an Emolga in Black and White. In Black and White on the same route with the same guy, you trade a Boldore for an Emolga. So now with Black and White 2, he basically wants to do the trade back and gives you the Gigalith that Boulder evolved into. So that's just really good storytelling that I appreciate that a lot. Um, the main reason why this isn't any higher on the list is because Emolga can be a little tricky to find on that route. You can find Emolga on Route 7, but they can only be found in the rustling grass. And those can be a little tedious to grind for because the vast majority of the time Audino are going to spawn and rustling grass doesn't happen all the time. So it might be a little bit of a grind in order to get this Emolga, but in order to, have a Gigalith, I think it'll be worth it. Now, number nine, in Sword and Shield in Hammerlock City, we have Toxel for a Togepi. Now, I like this trade a lot for several reasons. One, theoretically, if you just don't touch the Toxel that was given to you in Sword and Shield, this could kind of functionally just be a gift Pokemon. Because since you're given this Toxel for free, you just put it in your box, you don't think about it, and then you get here and you see Togepi, you can just trade the Toxel that's just sitting there for a Togepi basically for free. So I like that a lot. And two, Togepi, evolving into eventually the Togekiss is an absolutely incredible Pokemon. The main reason this isn't higher on the list is that it first evolves through friendship, which can be a little tedious, and then have to use a shiny stone, which I'm not exactly sure where you find shiny stones, maybe somewhere in the wild area. Like I'm sure you could fairly easily get a shiny stone, but it might just be a little bit of a slog in order to eventually get it to that Togekiss. But once you get that Togekiss, it can help you through a lot of challenging fights throughout the rest of the game. You have the dark gem, you have the dragon gem, and it just being a Togekiss alone, it has a lot of coverage moves. It has, I believe this one has the ability Serene Grace. So yeah, it can be it can carry you through a lot of the game if you haven't, if you didn't use that Toxel, I would easily recommend trading it. So so yeah, it's just a very, very solid trade that you get around the middle point of the game. So that's pretty solid, I think. Number eight, on Cinnabar Island in yellow, like I said, there are actually some good trades on this island. You have a Growlithe that you trade for a Dugong. This is pretty much the exact opposite of that trade for Kangaskhan for uh, Kangaskhan for a Muck, because Growlithe can also be found in the Pokemon Mansion, and then Dugong are found on that optional area, Seafoam Islands. And then, like I said, with the Seal trade, Dugong is an incredible Pokemon to take into the Elite Four. Water and Ice just have incredible coverage with each other, and Ice is again very rare just throughout the region. And it's a really good answer into Lance. So, yeah, I would very much recommend doing this trade if for no other reason than just it's also a really good answer into the immediate next two gyms being Blaine the Fire Gym and then Giovanni the Ground Gym. So if you somehow got that far without having a good like actual water and or ice type on your team, like there are other Pokemon that can learn Surf, like Rhydon, Kangaskhan, Nidoking, etc. So there is a way you can get here without having an actual water type. If you get here without a water type and are struggling with those gyms, I would easily recommend doing this trade. Next up, number seven. In Sword and Shield, in the Sword Chester, we have a Vanillish for a throw or a sock, depending on your game. Um, I really like when trades have it where you trade for the version exclusive that isn't in your game. In Black and White and Black and White 2, there is a trade where you can trade a Cottony for a Petalil and vice versa, depending on the game. And I like here where you can't normally find throw in sword and then the same with sock and shield, but through this trade, you can get one. So I like that, but also since the gym in Sir Chester is either a ice or a rock gym, this trade is great into either one. So in both games, this is just amazing trade to go into that gym and then also the dark gym right after. So I think this is a very good trade. Um, and it being something for a version exclusive just adds a little more flavor that I think puts it over the others before it. Number six, we have a Cubone for a Machoke in the Underground Path in yellow, and that Machoke evolves into a Machamp. Now, obviously, this is absolutely incredible. Um, Now, for the record, Machamp definitely is one of those Pokemon that kind of got better as the generations went on, just because it learned better moves, it got better abilities and stuff. Whereas in Gen 1, it still is a very good Pokemon. It has an incredible attack stat, solid bulk. It could carry you th through a lot of the game. However, its best fighting move is submission. So really its best fighting move is low kick. Because karate chop wasn't a fighting move back then. Seismic toss does a set amount of damage. Um, and with submission being something that does recoil and has a pretty good chance of missing, if you're relying on fighting stab to carry you throughout most of the game, it's not the most ideal in general in Gen 1. If this were in if this trade were available in Leaf Green Fire Red, this might be top three material easily because at that point you have access to moves like Cross Chop and Brick Break. Even Karate Chop would actually help you at that point. Low kick can be pretty devastating at later points since Pokemon get heavier, later into the game generally. You can teach yourself like Return, Rock Slide. So yeah, in Leaf Green Fire Red, this would be absolutely broken, but how it is in Gen 1, Machamp is good. It's actually a great Pokemon. It's just not super strong in the region in the games that it's from. I could easily see someone disagreeing with that. That's completely fine. I could even like, some point down the line talk myself into this being higher up, but as of right now, I think being solid sixth place, just barely out of the top five, especially since Cubone, you can find them in the Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town, but only at like 5% chance on the higher floors. So there's a pretty decent chance that you could miss it. So so yeah, like if Cubone were a Pokemon that I think if this were a Pokemon that were more common, it would easily be higher up. But just the situation that it's in right now, I think six is a good spot for it. On to number five, we have the Japanese Blue Route 2 trade of Jigglypuff for Mr. Mime. Something I find kind of fun about this trade is that in every single Gen 1 game, there is a trade for a Mr. Mime, but the material you trade for is different in every game. In red and blue, it's a Abra, and in yellow, it's Clefairy. So I knew that one of those needed to be on here somewhere. I wasn't going to put all three because I think all three of them probably should be on this list since Psychic is such a great type in Gen 1. It's pretty much completely broken in Gen 1. Um, but the way just in order to have more variety on this list, I only included one of each. Like, if there were multiple different games, like remakes or versions that had the same traits, I just did one instance of it you know per region, pretty much. So the best instance of this kind of trade, I believe, is the Jigglypuff for the Mr. Mime, because I think Jigglypuff is just the more or less the easiest to obtain at this point. Um, because Abra can obviously use teleport, so if you don't catch in the first ball, it'll just get away. And also, Kadabra is arguably a better Pokemon than Mr. Mime. It's a little faster and hits a little harder with higher special. If this were Gen 2 or later, it would have Mr. Mime would have higher special defense than Kadabra does, so there could be an argument there. But in Generation 1, Kadabra is probably better off just evolving your Abra and just using Kadabra. In yellow, it's a Clefairy, which have I believe it's either a 5 or a 1% encounter rate on like the lower floors of Mount Moon, whereas Jigglypuff, I believe, has a 4 or 5% encounter rate on the grass leading towards Mount Moon. So technically, Jigglypuff would be easier to get than Clefairy. So I think this is just the best instance of this trade. And again, Mr. Mime is an absolutely incredible Pokemon in Generation 1. Um, Honestly, yellow would be a great game to do like an all trade run of. You have a Machamp, you have Mr. Mime here. There's a couple other trades that aren't terrible. Obviously, the Dugtree one is terrible. Don't ever do that trade, but there's a couple other ones here and there that I think, could make for a solid enough team if you were to do an entire team based on trades. Next up, number four, we have in Silage City from X and Y, we have a Love Disc for a Steelix. Now, Love Disc are found in the waters of Silage City. And considering that Love Disc is absolutely terrible, this is just like the Togepi trade word. This is kind of functionally a gift Pokemon where you just, for the price of what a Pokeball is like 150, 200 Pokedollars, for the price of $200, you can get a Steelix. It's not even an Onyx that has a metal coat that evolves into a Steelix. It's just a Steelix for some reason. I couldn't tell you why they decided to give you a Steelix. Maybe they figured they made the rock gym too hard, so they put this steel type trade here. But why is it a Steelix? Why isn't it like a Honedge or a Pawniard or an Aeron or some other steel type that would be better suited for the second gem? I don't know, but they decided to go with Steelix. So there you go. I believe technically this might be a little technically wrong because of just the way the Cuban for the Machamp trade works, but for the from the Pokemon that you trade for the Pokemon you receive, I believe this is the biggest difference between base stat totals. Love I believe, has 330 base stat total, and Steelix has 510. So that is an incredible distance between. Obviously, Cubone, I believe, is a little weaker than Love Disc, and Machamp is, I think, 500 base stat total. But you're trading for a Machoke. So this, as far as the Pokemon you're actually trading for, this is the biggest difference between base stat total. So yeah, absolutely incredible. The only reason this trade isn't any higher on the list is because X and Y are not difficult in the slightest. Um, you do not need to do this trade in order to beat the Rock Gym and then beat the Electric Gym and then beat the Fairy Gym and then beat the Ice Gym. It's good that this Steelix is helpful for many major trainers throughout the game, but there are so many different options in Generation 6 that can help you along your way. You have access to Mega Evolutions, just there's a lot going for the player in those games to make those games super easy. You don't need to do this trade. I would still easily recommend doing this trade, but because those games are already so easy, I personally prioritize games that I felt were just a little harder that maybe this Pokemon is more necessary to actually beat the game. So, yeah. Moving on to number three, and ironically, something that is actually, I believe, better than a trade for a Steelix is a trade for an Onyx. In Violet City Gold and Silver, you trade a Bellsprout for an Onyx. And this actually has a lot of the same like vibes that the Steelix does. You can catch a Bellsprout on the route just outside of Violet City for an Onyx. And this Onyx is actually fantastic into the first three gems. You have the flying gem, obviously super effective into that. You have the bug gem, again, super effective into that. And the normal gem, it's defensively good into that. And like I said, I prioritize trades that happen earlier in the playthrough. And since this Onyx is good into the first three gems in a, I believe, harder generation than X and Y, this just barely edges out that Steelix. I recommend doing both of those trades in their respective games, but this trade I think is more necessary in order for the player to get further into the game. Whereas X and Y, there's a lot of other Pokemon that can help you, that can, be feasible answers into. uh, into the gyms you have trouble with. Good rock types that early on are not very common. So yeah, I think doing this trade is almost mandatory for any, especially any newcomer for gold and silver, just to help you get through the first, third of the game. Number two, in Cerulean City from Red and Blue, we have Poliwhirl for Jinx. Not only is this great because Jinx is not available anywhere else in the entire region, you have to do this trade in order to get Jinx for your Pokedex. But Jinx is just absolutely incredible. Um, Jinx, its Psychic and Ice typing, could basically single-handedly defeat the Grass Gym, the Poison Gym. It's even good defensively into the Psychic Gym. Actually, one of her Pokemon is poison, so it's even good into that. The ground gym, and then three of the Elite Four members. The only one that you would even like maybe need something to balance it with would be against the fire gym. But even then, back in Gen 1, ice was not very effective into fire. Ice was neutral into fire for some reason. So considering just how fast this Jinx will level up, assuming it'll still pay attention to you. Um, if you just fire off ice beams into all of his Pokemon, there's a kind of decent chance you can just sweep his team with just Jinx. So yeah, this is an incredible Pokemon to take through the majority of Red and Blue. Um, it is not even that like if you just play through the story, you can get this Pokemon before the fourth gem because you can't get Poliwhirl until after you awaken the Snorlax on below Lavender Town. But if you just play the game normally, go to Cerulean, don't fight the gem yet, come back to Lavender Town, do everything you need to do there, go immediately south, awaken the Snorlax, and then keep going just a little further to get the Super Rod, and then fish up a Poliwhirl. And then by that point, you theoretically should have already gone up to Cerulean department store to get the freshwater to unlock the gates. On top of Cerulean department store is where you get the Ice Beam TM. In Saffron City is where you get the Psychic TM. So if you just go back up to Cerulean to do this trade, you can have a Jinx that already knows Ice Beam and Psychic and just carry you through the rest of the game. So yeah, again, just absolutely incredible trade. I I could easily see someone just, getting through the majority of the game up to that point and then doing that trade, just having this Jinx just carry them through the rest of the game. So incredible. And the one honorable mention I wanted to shout out. Um, this is something that I find very funny that they seemingly kind of this is like their chance at redemption for the Mindy trade from like Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl, the games right before, or like the the outside of Legends Arceus, the games right before Scarlet and Violet. Uh, they have in Levincia Town, they have a Pincurchin for a Haunter, which does actually evolve into a Gengar. It would have been kind of funny if the guy that does that trade had some line about him meaning to put an Everstone on it, like intending to prank, or maybe even a thing where he's Mindy's cousin or something and heard they did that and wanted to do it but forgot to put the Everstone on. That would have been funny, but it's not necessary. The point is you can have a Gengar by the third gym, and then you can just, you know, have that carry you through the rest of the game, which is even significantly better than the trade that would have been at Snow Point because by the time you're at the seventh gym, your team is probably already filled out. You don't really need, you probably won't be switching anything out for that theoretically Gengar by that point. But by the time you hit the third gym, there's still some wiggle room for your team. So yeah, throw a Gengar on there basically for free. So why not? I find it funny that people still to this day super harp on Mindy's Haunter scheme, but then when they finally let you actually trade for a Haunter that evolves into a Gengar, people don't ever seem to really bring it up. So I just wanted to bring it up here. And lastly, number one, this trade is just unquestionably the single most bizarre decision that I believe someone at Game Freak has ever done. I genuinely could not comprehend why they would give you a Pokemon this good this early. Like every single criteria that I have is easily met with this one here. The Pokemon that you trade is found on Route 1 for a Pokemon that is usually found way later. Um, the Pokemon is absolutely incredible into not only the next immediate trials, it's also fantastic into the vast majority of the rest of the game. The trade is done on Route 2, so it's super early on. It's got it all. That being Spearow for a Halucha in Ultra Sun and Moon. Again, you can just find a Spearow on, you know, I believe it's Route 1, but if not Route 1, at least Route 2, and then trade it for a Halucha, which even with its brave nature slowing it down a little bit, that doesn't matter. Halucha is incredibly fast. It has the ability Unburden, which, you can do shenanigans with that, which just doubles its speed in battle. It's good into the normal trial coming up and the fighting Kahuna. And then it's also great into the grass trial and then the rock Kahuna. And then just so many other points throughout the game. It's just nice to have a Halucha. So just like with the Steelix, where you basically get this Halucha for free just by having a Pokemon that you find super early in the game. But in this case, the reason why this is so high is that Ultra Sun and Moon are actually very difficult games. A lot of people consider them to be the hardest Pokemon games, and I kind of agree with that. So, whereas Steelix, yes, it can carry you through X and Y, but those games are so easy, it's not really necessary. This Halucha is almost mandatory in order to help you get through a lot of the very challenging trials and kahunas and other stuff throughout the game. So, yeah. Easily recommend this trade. Like again, I don't know how they they justify doing this trade this early, but it was the perfect trade at the perfect time, just especially on that first island, but even beyond, just give the player just an automatic win for the first, good portion of the game. So yeah, I think this is easily the best trade in the entire franchise. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Just like with the top 10 worst, if you disagree with any of the choices I made with the top 10 best, please let me know through any that you thought should be higher or lower, or any other trades I didn't talk about. One specifically I didn't mention was Muscle the Machop you can find right before Whitney, but I do really think that Onyx being defensively good into Whitney is it doesn't like counter out the need for Muscle the Machop, but it's I feel of those two trades, I think the Onyx trade is better overall, especially since it's good into three gems, whereas Muscle is really only great into the next immediate gem. Um, so yeah, like I said, there were several other trades that could have gone on this list. There are some that we're like, 6 or higher that maybe could be a little lower, like that Machamp trade. Again, I could easily see that being, switching with Steelix or even moving down to where Onyx is. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. I appreciate all of you for coming along this ride with me. Please let me know down below what are some of your favorite in-game trades. Have you done any of these trades? Have any of the good trades have any of the good trades carried you throughout your journey? Have any of the bad trades just significantly disappointed you? Or have you actually been pleasantly surprised by any of the bad trades I mentioned here, or disappointed by the good ones? Yeah, please let me know all that down below. I'd love to have a discussion going. And with that, we will see you all next time.